The topic of nostalgia is like so near and dear to my heart because of how much I feel like I've been affected by it. As if it's like a disease. Yes, it's true. I suffer from nostalgia very deeply. Happy 4th birthday to Animal Crossing, that one song by Benny. You know which one I'm talking about. Whipped Coffee, The Renegade, Charli D'Amelio, and also The Last Time That You Were Happy. We're now approaching the 4-year mark since COVID started, or at least since it came to the US, March 2020. I've done other pandemic-related content. I know that in 2020 and 2021, nobody wanted to watch any kind of content about quarantine, the pandemic, any of that stuff. Completely warranted because everyone was burnt out from that content. It was like, okay, I'm literally looking for escape. I don't want to talk about it some more. However, I feel like enough time has passed now to where, you know, we ignore and gaslight ourselves that the pandemic never happened. And also, I know damn well all of you are about to start feeling the anniversary effect and be like, why do I miss the pandemic? Why do I miss lockdown? Why do I miss quarantine? Because it's March.
I actually miss the start of the pandemic.
I miss the pandemic.
I don't know if it's crazy for me to say, but honestly, I kind of miss COVID.
Recently, I've been really yearning for March 2020. I don't really know.
The pandemic in Miami was a time to be the fuck alive, okay?
I feel like it'd be very unfair for me to not talk about this because it is heavily on my mind, and hopefully it just reaches the right audience of people who need to hear something like this. Honey, you need to be quiet. We're talking about a worldwide pandemic that killed a lot of people. This idea kind of sparked for me because I, of course, am feeling the anniversary effect. If you don't know what the anniversary effect is, it's basically just a collection of disturbing feelings, thoughts, and or memories that can occur on or around the anniversary of a traumatic event, commonly seen in those with PTSD or those who have experienced the death of a loved one, such as a parent or grandparent. Same thing applies for mass tragedies. And I saw TikToks of people being like, I miss whipped coffee. I miss playing Animal Crossing. I miss this certain music that was around on TikTok during that time. I miss actually having hobbies. And it's something that I have definitely felt a lot, and I've been very ashamed to talk about. Additionally, I was reminded of it because the other day I went to go get a blood test, which is truly one of my favorite pastimes. I don't have a praise kink. I have a praise kink when it comes from a phlebotomist who is like, your veins are so good. You are doing such a good job. And I'm like, you cannot say that to me because I'm gonna be thinking about you for the rest of the week, even though you're like a 65-year-old woman. That is the sexiest thing that you could have ever said to me. Don't look me in my eye. And the weather was muggy outside and it was a little warm, but there was a breeze. And suddenly I was like transported back in time, back to like when I was 20 years old, walking my off-campus apartment. I lived on Temple's campus. I don't even remember where I lived. However, I was making YouTube videos at the time. It was paying my rent for the first time ever and I was so happy. I also had a class with one of my favorite Viners. Like literally this person walked into my class one day and I was like, you raised me. And it was a weird time in life, okay? Every single school had just shut down and ours was like one of the last to shut down and be like, okay, you bitches gotta go home. No more classes. They're all online. And I remember walking home and I was on the phone with my mom and my mom was like, this is really bad, Nicole. Like, you don't understand. Like, this is gonna be really, really, really bad. And then I went home, packed up all my shit and literally left. Temple University is shutting down and going online because of, you guessed it, the coronavirus, COVID-19. And now it's 4 years later. I have 2 kids, one's right there, still making YouTube videos, it's still paying my rent, back living in Philly, and still getting my blood drawn very regularly. My blood test results are so beautiful though nowadays, like, don't even ask me about my vitamin D levels because I will be annoying. That's like another sexy, sinister thing that you could say to me. Your vitamin D levels are beautiful and you have really good veins. Stop. Come on, please. Stop. Anyway, I bring this all up because nostalgia for lockdown is very, very normal. A lot of people are going through it. However, I had never heard of anyone personally like that I had met suffering through like really harsh nostalgia, like the kind of nostalgia that felt like a knife into your stomach and it twisting. When people describe nostalgia, they usually say it's bittersweet or they like look fondly on times in the past. That it helps them be optimistic and helps them be happy and like reminisce on good times. I don't think I know anyone else in my personal life who genuinely struggles with nostalgia not being something that I look back on fondly or with optimism, but something that quite literally hurts me so bad and feels like severe pain. Spoiler alert, I'm doing a lot better with it now, which I'll talk about later, but that's like a new thing in my life, okay? Like that's new. I had a real issue with missing horrible times in my life. And one of the biggest things that I was so extremely nostalgic for was the beginning of quarantine, specifically early 2020, mid-2020, the end of 2020, all of that. I could not look back on photos or videos or anything that has to do with my past, songs even from that time, because it would feel like the most gut-wrenching feeling in the entire world, and no one around me understood that. They're like, that's not like normal. God, I hope someone else really, not that I hope that someone else feels horrible, but as I was researching for this video, I was like, oh my God, a lot of people do feel this way. That's very nice to know. And the way that my therapist had explained it to me is that I don't actually miss that like horrible time in my life per se. It's more so that I exaggerating the silver linings during those horrible times. And it actually made it feel like that time was a lot better than what it really was. So when I'm sitting here reminiscing about like what seems to be some of the worst times of my life, and I'm like, why can't I go back? I want to go back so bad. And then I suffer with guilt from that. I'm like, why would I want to go back to such a horrible time in my life? And then I struggle through this whole thing like, am I a liar? Am I just like lying about my past? Was that past like not as bad as I remember it being? Am I a fraud? Am I a liar? Am I exaggerating? What is my true emotion? I don't know. It also didn't help that in 2020, I literally didn't know that I had OCD, because all of what I'm describing is pretty common in people who struggle with OCD. For those of you who have maybe discovered me recently, have not watched my channels back then, hey. But also, let me trauma dump. No, I'm kidding. But back in 2020, my mom got diagnosed with cancer in May of 2020. So pandemic started in March 2020, May 2020 got diagnosed. Not one cancer, but boom, two. I also had undiagnosed OCD. I had no idea what I was struggling with. I just had what I thought was severe anxiety, what I thought was appropriately responding to my mom being like, very not okay. I only grew up with my mom. She is the closest person to me. I moved back home at the beginning of the pandemic, and then because I was able to be so flexible with YouTube being my job, I became her full-time caregiver. Okay, having cancer during COVID had its benefits, okay? Like, obviously that is a very weird thing to say, but hear me out. Nobody was going to the doctors in the beginning of 2020 to see if they had cancer, because everyone was more worried about other things. So oncologist offices were empty, meaning my mom was able to get treatment pretty fast and pretty easily. However, that also meant that we were always in doctor's offices and hospitals all the time, which made my contamination OCD, which at the time I did not know was contamination OCD, made me freak the fuck out all the time. And OCD just like heightened that. So I was like, oh my God, if I touch the wrong thing and then I accidentally touch something that my mom touches, she's gonna die. And then it's gonna be all my fault. And so basically I made it my like #1 priority and goal to keep my mom alive. And if you go back and watch any of my content in 2020, boy, was I struggling. That like trickled into 2021, like I was a shell of a human being. I'm doing so much better now. She's cancer-free. She's doing so much better now. So when quarantine was starting to pass by, things were starting to open up, you know, I was able to move out of my house, and I started feeling nostalgic for the pandemic and quarantine. I was like, what the fuck is wrong with me? I am an evil, disgusting little human being. Like, I am vile. How could one possibly be nostalgic for a time that was so awful? Lo and behold, it's normal. And I like talking about things that I don't hear other people talking about that make me feel a little bit more normal, especially when it has to do with mental health and OCD. So here we go. I have this one video on my channel called I Quit My Job Today. It's a video in which I quit my job. I quit my Chipotle job. I quit my job today! Like, I literally just started earning money off of ad revenue off my videos. So I celebrated by going to Party City, just buying some supplies, like throwing myself a little party in my car. Truly peak life moment for me. Like, that is an awesome moment. That same night, I remember I went to a Mac DeMarco concert with some friends. I just remember that day so vividly and so clearly. Well, definitely, yes, I'm so appreciative for those moments, and it's 100% a great day in my life. Don't get me wrong. My brain categorizes it as one of the top 3 moments of my entire life, like literally top 3 best days of my entire life ever. Reason being, because the next day was the start to like some of the most awful months ever for me. Why? I got put on probation at my RA job because I took a sip of wine from my roommate's wine glass. She's like, you ever had rosé? I'm like, no, I never have. And then I took a sip. Big mistake. Big mistake. Anyway, that literally led to me being put on probation, to then like severe roommate problems. Like, we literally had to go to like, it was almost like marriage counseling, but for roommates. I guess it's just called like roommate counseling. I felt very unsafe in my apartment for various reasons. My depression was some of the absolute worst it's ever been. Morale was low. However, I look back on that day, the day before, as one of the best days of my entire life, where I got to throw myself a little party in my car and film a video, and I went to a Mac DeMarco concert. Believe me, I have done a lot more fun videos since then, and I've gone to many more concerts that have been way more fun, but I look at that moment so fondly because it was the silver lining in a very horrible time, and it's like the last good memory I can remember. And I bring this all up because that is simply what we are doing with quarantine nostalgia. It is not that our life was actually truly that amazing during quarantine, or that we were the happiest we had ever been in our entire lives, or that if we were to be transported back right now, we would be so immensely grateful. It is simply just that we are looking at the good parts with rose-colored glasses on because it's our brain protecting itself. Sorry, newsflash, here to break it to you. The pandemic wasn't as great as you remember. I know, you can't believe it. Tiger King wasn't that good. Animal Crossing, only fun for a few weeks. Zoom classes, not fun at all. Do you think people in the 1920s were like, I miss the Spanish influenza so much? I want to go back so bad. I want to go back so bad. Were we nostalgic for the Spanish influenza? Yes or no? So, Christine Batcho, PhD, a professor of psychology at Le Moyne College, who has spent decades researching nostalgia, has said, in traumatic situations like the pandemic, it may actually come in handy. In fact, a recent research has found that nostalgia often combines happiness and sadness into a constructive narrative that can contribute to processing and ultimately moving on from traumatic experiences. Nostalgia, the personal kind, has been associated with very healthy aspects of well-being, such as empathy, compassion, forgiveness, social connectedness, belonging, anxiety reduction, continuity of self, and optimism. The past is fixed, but present circumstances and emotions can tint our view of it, rendering memories in a more pleasant light. Reading that helped me so much with my guilt of remembering past horrible memories as like so fond, because believe me, I too would love to be like, I miss making sourdough bread. I miss making whipped coffee. I miss making TikToks of me dancing. I miss Animal Crossing without my brain automatically being like, you are a horrible and awful person for even thinking that for a split second. Oh, do you miss the morgues being overfilled? Do you miss when bodies had to be burned en masse in crematoriums? Oftentimes we're so critical of ourselves based off of what our first thought into our brain is rather than the response that we have to that thought. And if you're in exposure response prevention therapy, then you know you are not a bad person if you are struggling with OCD or intrusive thoughts and you're at a red light and someone is walking the crosswalk and a thought comes to mind, you should run over that person. You're not a bad person for that. It's what action you take after that. It's not running that person over that shows your true character and your true self. And so me missing a time where I got to spend time with my family more, and I got to be at home, and I was a bit more relaxed, and I was eating really good, and I got to go outside a lot. That does not mean that I suddenly miss the times in which people were literally dying from COVID. That does not mean that I literally missed the time where my mom was the most sick I have ever seen her in my entire life. It is simply just the nostalgia for the innocence of lockdown, because the country did feel united. Imagine.
All the people
living for today.
Because God knows this country does not feel like one anymore. This does not feel like a community at all. We were not actually as happy as we may remember. Let us not forget that we had whole compilations of what life was like before the pandemic. It's nostalgia core, it's nostalgia bait. Don't feed into it. I'm kidding. It's actually good. It's actually good for your brain. It's actually just called mass trauma nostalgia. Nostalgia for mass traumatic events is nothing new. The keep calm and carry on spirit by Britons during World War II. Hi, I'm filming. I'm talking about World War II. Oh. Keep calm and carry on spirit among Britons during World War II is still nostalgized on decorative products based on government posters intended to boost morale during devastated air raids. And New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman wrote of a certain longing and nostalgic for sense of American solidarity in the immediate wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And unlike those cases, the very nature of the pandemic is isolating. The yearning for togetherness is even stronger. Guys, the yearning is real. Every year on September 11th, Americans can gather and commemorate that tragic day together. On March 11th, Japan remembers the 2011 earthquake and tsunami that killed more than 20,000 people. These kinds of official memorials help people process collective trauma and move past it, but so far, there is no pandemic day. COVID isn't over, so how could we technically even move on? That's another reason why I just didn't feel like it was fair for me to be like, I'm not gonna talk about it, nobody wants to hear about COVID anymore, because we have like numbed ourselves so much to it. It has affected everyone, some people more than others. Marginalized groups, those who are disabled, immunocompromised people. Number two, it's still affecting people. I think if we all have this notion that we can just forget that a pandemic happened, we're just we're lying to ourselves. Better to talk through it, work it out, think about it, than gaslighting ourselves that it didn't happen, and then suddenly in March 2024 being like, guys, the pandemic wasn't that bad. It was actually really fun. Plus, it's no secret that people's mental health is really suffering right now. I think a lot of old folks love to be like, these fucking kids and their mental illnesses nowadays are like choosing to ignore what everyone had endured for the last few years. And like I said, some more than others. So while some on social media have expressed embarrassment at their early pandemic nostalgia, the stupidest emotion I've ever experienced, tweeted one, there's really no reason to be ashamed of revisiting those strange shower-free days of binge watching, boredom eating, and often overdue bonding. Adversity in itself while you're going through it can be extremely negative, stressful experience, says Bacho. But if you come out on the other end as a survivor, then later in life, you look back at that longingly. Not for the adversity itself, but for the fact that you've overcome it. And in general, nostalgia had actually naturally just grown because of the pandemic. Think about the resurgence of all the nostalgic TV shows coming back, whether that's reboots or podcasts about our favorite shows when we were kids. Reboots that are a thing that don't need to be, but are. But don't get me wrong, there are definitely people who are not nostalgic towards lockdown whatsoever. Mental illness, suicide rates, domestic violence, all rose. People obviously lost loved ones, family members, or their own lives. Some people had extremely debilitating anxiety, mental health struggles. Like, it had really affected a lot of people. But then on the flip side, there's also people who really struggled with mental illness who look back at the time so fondly because they're like, oh my God, there was nothing to be expected of me. Very enjoyable to be able to be in the house. I didn't have to exert myself in ways that I don't normally like to. I was able to take off from work or off from school. It really benefited my mental health. Obviously, every single person's experience is extremely unique. Whether you're nostalgic or not for it, it's valid, it's fine. You don't need to hear me saying that. I low-key hate it when people say, you are valid. Like, am I the valid police? But in general, the topic of nostalgia is like so near and dear to my heart because of how much I feel like I've been affected by it. As if it's like a disease. Yes, it's true. I suffer from nostalgia very deeply. Nostalgia is described to be a shield against unhappiness and can boost optimism and hope. And it's really hard when there's people like me who like cannot relate to that and feel immense pain looking back at things. Quite literally 13 years ago today, I posted on Facebook as an 11-year-old, and I said, I hate how everything changes and nothing will be the same as yesterday. Like, damn, this bitch was going through dread even back then. Very ironic that I'm making a video about it 13 years later, but that would control my life so much. I would constantly think about friends that I don't have anymore, or situations in my life that I don't necessarily have anymore, or how I'll never be able to relive something from when I was 17 years old. Like, that will never happen ever again, and I am just going to be upset for the rest of my life. Simply letting like the present moment pass me by. I was unable to cope and like sit with the fact that time continues to go on. And it sounds silly, but similar in the way that I could not move on, that I will never get that day back from when I threw myself that little party in my car when I quit my job and when I went to a Mac DeMarco concert that night. I could not get over that. I will never relive that day. And I remember a few years ago when I was really struggling with my OCD, I would drive to that party city over and over again and just walk through it to try and relive that same feeling once again because I longed for it so bad. I tried to recreate that day so bad. And that happens with so many different things. I would try to recreate these memories or these moments where I would be with people who I know I no longer am as good as friends with, but I am trying to recreate that feeling that was once there many years ago because I cannot simply move on, that life is continuing and that the nostalgia hurts and that this is just a memory and that this isn't present day anymore. I cannot begin to explain how much it was ruining my life. Wow, surprise, surprise, rumination is like a symptom of OCD. I was like the queen of ruminating. A 2012 study explored potential negative effects of nostalgia in a sample of over 200 adults. The participants, most of whom were university students, answered questions about their mood, including if they experienced anxiety or depression, tendency to worry, nostalgic memories, which they were asked to describe using visual imagery and other sensory details. According to the results, participants who tended to worry more often also reported stronger feelings of depression and anxiety after talking about their past. In the late 1600s, nostalgia was actually considered a form of depression. So while nostalgia depression isn't necessarily recognized as like a real form of depression by a lot of psychologists, I think it's still fair to say that a lot of people really go through with that. And personally, I think we're gonna see a lot of, especially teenagers and young adults, face this nostalgia depression per se, especially in the month of March because of the anniversary effect for years to come. And especially since it affected everyone in the world, it's like, fuck, what do you do about that? What do you do about like millions of people facing like nostalgia depression? That's really fucking tough. I will say that this is the first year that I'm not really experiencing bad nostalgia depression vibes, symptoms. I think I'm doing pretty well so far. We'll see how it feels in April, but I remember definitely the last few years were very rough for me. And I know my friends and family say similar things, and I know probably when May comes around, it's like the anniversary of my mom getting diagnosed, that's gonna probably hit twice as hard again. And shit's weird. And I don't know, I haven't heard anyone talk about it, so I really wanted to sit down and make a video about it because it's important to me. Please be nice to yourself in the coming weeks and months. Take a weekend and do the things that you would have done during quarantine, like making time for yourself without the expectation that you'll have the exact same feelings as you thought you had back then. I don't know, go make whipped coffee, listen to Super Lonely by Benny, go for a walk, sit in your PJs, play Animal Crossing, do a Chloe Ting workout if that makes you happy. I will say that's another thing that I definitely experience. I have like regret. I'm like, oh, why didn't I do these things during quarantine? Like, oh my God, why didn't I start a fucking business during quarantine? Like how everyone else did. Yeah, I started my business during quarantine and like, look at it go now. I mean, quite literally my YouTube channel did exceptionally well because of COVID and then people staying home. But there's always these feelings of regret and like, why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? What are the things that I would change? I feel really bad for the kiddos and like the teens out there who are gonna be going through it because of these feelings. It's a coping mechanism. Professor of philosophy, psychology, and neuroscience at Duke University, Philippe de Brigard, told the New York Times, you have to carry your past with you. If a memory hurt every time you recalled it as much as when you experienced it, that would be unbearable. Even if you don't realize it, there's a good chance you're blocking out the fear that it came with the uncertainty of those days, and because of that, you're missing only the parts your brain has chosen to remember, the good stuff. Because up until I was like writing up my whole document for this video, I did not remember that I was Googling like crazy, when will it end? When will it end? Like, when is it gonna end? When is the pandemic gonna end? How many people tested positive today? What state is the worst? When are we getting a vaccine? I literally had to block the words COVID, coronavirus off of my Twitter feed. Like, I'm pretty sure they're still blocked to this day because I could not read them without spiraling. Clap. Anyway, everyone should be taking care of themselves, especially around this time, because I think it's very foolish for people to pretend that it didn't happen and that we as a collective, maybe some people more than others, are going to be experiencing real life effects of the trauma from this. Chlamydia was a pandemic, baby. And yes, that's all from me. Make sure you subscribe if you want to be nasty, if not you're disgusting. Also make sure every bell notifications on so you know every single time I post, or else you're gross. Make sure that you leave a like because that helps me out so much. Also make sure that you leave a comment about anything that you want if you are going through something like this, like painful, sinister ass nostalgia. What helps you feel better, and if you're like feeling the effects. I'm sure that the comment section is going to be like a great community for people to talk about how they're feeling, because I'm very lucky that most of the people who comment on my videos are like-minded people and like the coolest fucking people ever. So I have merch. I also have a podcast that comes out every other Monday. If you want to follow me on my other social media, Instagram, Twitter, T-Pop, Spotify, just at Nicole Rafiee. And if you want to follow me on my TikTok, it's at Nikki Nasty. I'm gonna go now. You bet your ass I'm listening to Super Lonely. I don't care. I don't care. And maybe I'll play Animal Crossing tonight. Yeah, I think I will. Okay, bye.